He was a cab driver. He was in his cab that day. He had just dropped a fare off. He came to the Gentlemen's Club and was sitting in his cab eating his lunch when Officer Tippit was shot. Well, Mr. Scoggins told me, he said, Mike, he said, he said, man, when it happened, he said, I didn't even think about it. He said, I jumped out of my cab. He said, oh, what he said was, he said, oh, he said to himself, or how you'll talk when something happened, he said, that son of a bitch shot that policeman. That's what he said. And he got real nervous. He jumped out of the cab and he started to run, but he realized, hey, somebody's got a gun. So he come back and he just stood there by the cab for a minute. Then he bent down by the left fender. But what he said he forgot, or it didn't enter his mind, Mr. Scoggins had a .38 snub-nosed revolver in his glove box of his cab. He was a cab driver and he often worked at night, and he had a pistol, and he said he didn't even think about, and being a World War II veteran, I asked him, I said, well, I said, Mr. Scoggins, I said that. He said, yeah, I know. He said, but I didn't. He said, man, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. He said, this guy was shooting this policeman. And he also told me, he said, when the officer passed in front of him, he recognized he had seen Officer Tippit many times at Austin Barbecue and in the neighborhood. Mr. Scoggins himself lived in Oak Cliff on Alaska. I went to his house. I can get my cousin Don Wayne Brigham, my former partner that I used to bounty hunt with, Johnny Santos, and another very dear friend of mine, Clark Kirkland, who's still living. They were all three there with me when I talked to Mr. Scoggins in 1972 at the corner of 10th and Patton. And Mr. Scoggins' daughter, his oldest daughter, and I think she still lives she may just recently moved with her and her back down to East Texas, but I think she's still in the Dallas area. She was there the day that I also, and I can definitely confirm that I talked to Bill Scoggins 2 different times. His daughter was there both times. And so many times, Bill and Brother Steve, something you say, Bill, that's very true. I would also I want to mention a name that I don't think he will, and I'm just going to mention his name, a man that Bill and I both know. Now, Bill knows him much better, and I've met him maybe 5 times. I've talked to Steve or told Steve about him, and many people know him. Mr. Greg Lowry, one of the true Dallas researchers in the Kennedy assassination, and of course a man that's been gone for a little while. He knew Penn Jones, Mr. Penn Jones, who also lived in the Dallas area. And you're talking 4 people, Penn Jones and Greg Lowry, Professor William Pulte, and myself, who in the Dallas scenario, we talked to more witnesses than anybody, any of the great researchers. Now, Robert Groden, again, this Mr. Groden's book, The Case for Conspiracy, it proves beyond any shadow of a doubt the medical pictures in Robert's book. Ladies and gentlemen, this is ABC. That's the back of President Kennedy's head. That's an exit wound. And Mr. Groden, Robert Groden, is certainly one of the top 3 great researchers in the Kennedy assassination. I give him all his due for the work he's done. He was the first man ever to show the entire Zapruder film on national TV. 1975, he went on the Geraldo Rivera show with Dick Gregory. And no one had ever shown the entire film till Robert showed it in 75. And his work is well respected in the Kennedy research world, and he's truly. And then of course another great researcher, the man who I think wrote the first great book and one of the 3 greatest books ever written. A man that I've known a long time, talked to him many times, met him, Mr. Josiah Thompson, who lives out in California still today. And of course in 1967 he released a book called 6 Seconds in Dallas, and that book, Mr. Thompson left it open to let you go to either side or both sides, but he presented the evidence in the greatest way I think it's ever been presented. And what a fabulous book it was, February 67, 6 Seconds in Dallas. That book was phenomenal. Mark Lane, Rush to Judgment, another great book. And so you're talking about the great researchers. But in the Dallas scene of meeting people, and some of them I met years later, but some of them I met in the early years, I was able to talk to many witnesses. Some of the doctors at Parkland, down through the years. And Brother Steve, I'm going to ask you, do you think, Steve, that when Oswald was shot, when Tippit was shot, do you think that it was the imposter, or do you think it could have been Oswald?
To this day, I can't decide.
You just been undecided on it?
Yeah. I just, if they looked alike, and these people hadn't seen them before.
Yes, sir. Certainly. That's a great day. Yeah. Cause you might be looking at the imposter.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's very possible.
And that complicates so much of the research, because you can't just say Oswald. You have to say, was it the
imposter,
actual Oswald, or was it the imposter? And that complicates everything.
That's why I was saying a while ago. Let me clear this up. I was just saying, if the real Lee Harvey Oswald shot J.D. Tippit, and let me say this too, another thing that I think we'll all three agree on and know, as many other, I know it, J.D. Tippit, Jack Ruby, and Lee Harvey Oswald, all three knew each other. And I believe that Tippit knew the real Oswald as well as the imposter.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Did he know him enough to know if the man he approached at 10th and Patton that day, when Tippit was killed, could he tell the difference? Well, some stories have surfaced lately that it's and now I'll go into this. Since this just came up, let me say this. Somewhere a minute after Officer Tippit was shot, or 1 minute before Officer Tippit was shot, in that 60 seconds, at the corner of 10th and Marsalis, 2.5 blocks away, you have a man that has been stabbed, violently stabbed. Mr. Cecil Smith, Bill and I talked to him together. Mr. Tom, a guy named Tom Black, he worked for Crown Plumbing, he saw it. Miss Harriet, the woman who owned Crown Plumbing, Mr. Siegel, they were all there. They ran, and the people at the auto place where Domingo Benavides was supposedly going to get the part, but they turned around, and so if he'd have kept going, he would have seen that. He often talked about that, but he did turn around in the driveway to go back to get the part number for the carburetor lease. And I believe that might be a legitimate story, because he told me that. But these people saw this man get stabbed. Miss Helan's son was coming up the street, and he was on a bicycle. And as he fast as he could pump, and he got up to the scene, he saw his mother standing out there, and he saw the policeman, and she told him, Miss Helan said she told her son, he was I think he was 17 at the time, or 16. And he wasn't as old as Jimmy Bertram, but he knew Jimmy Bertram. He knew Helen Markham's son, Jimmy Markham. They all knew each other. And she told her son, she said, baby, somebody shot this policeman. Well, he looked at his mom, and he said, Mom, he said, well, I see what's happening here. He's put down at the corner. He said, a man just got stabbed. He said, God, there's blood everywhere down there. He said, they threw the man in the back of a blue Mercury or a Lincoln and took off with him. Well, when Tippit was shot, right as he was shot, the first officer to arrive at the scene was Officer Kenneth Croy. And he ran up to the scene, and naturally being a policeman, now he was a reserve Dallas police sergeant. Now Tippit's been shot. Miss Helan and them have come out. So now, here comes another police officer from the east, one Harry Olson. And Harry Olson has told me this story himself. He jumps out of his squad car, and him and Croy are working the scene. They said you could hear the ambulance because the used funeral home was right around the corner, but instead of them making a left on Patton and coming up, they went down to Denver and came up and then come back. This woman in a yellow